We have the Shaykh offering us more important, timely reminders about the issues that we may see in our time, and that is as it relates to the publishing of books by people who are not very qualified. Those who work for book publishing companies and they produce books from manuscripts, you find them commonly putting footnotes in the book, long footnotes, long-winded footnotes that are not needed about the authenticity of the narrations, mimicking the speech of the scholars of Hadeeth as if to huff and puff as if he is from them. This is something that is complained about in the Arabic printing world. Likewise, we complain about it in the English translation world as well. You find people with long footnotes about the authenticity of a narration, loving to be viewed as someone who is a specialist in hadith and can distinguish between authentic and weak narrations. And it's just the best it could be said is it's someone mimicking the words of the scholars and removing the names of the scholars, and this is something displeasing and deceptive, as the Shaykh has mentioned, a kind of ghish, a kind of deception as it relates to our interactions with the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's an online forum that is supposed to be specialists who study the science of hadith. However, the online forum called Multaqa Ahlalhdeeth, it is overrun by hizbis, it is overrun by muta'alimeen, it is overrun by people that pretend to be scholars of hadith and pretend to know about hidden defects and pretend to know how to gather the chains together. And if a person were to look up something in Arabic like the wording of the hadith on Google, he may find one of the top results. A study of the hadith by this wording, he may find himself on this page, the Multaqa of Ahlul Hadith, and he may find people with screen names who are unknown. You may find them discussing the routes of the narration, people who are just unknown, discussing where the hadith is found in the different turuq, the different routes, and giving verdicts on this one and that one, and making decisions about taqwiyah, tahseen, the hadith becomes hasan by its various routes. And these are people who have read the books of the masters of the sciences of hadith, the likes of Shaykh al-Albani. These are people who have read the books of Ibn Hajar, al-Albani, these great scholars of hadith, and they wish to resemble them in their speech, so they begin to speak as if they are upon this caliber of knowledge. So be warned about this Multaqa Ahlul Hadith. You will go on there and you'll find people pointing out weaknesses to a hadith which the scholars authenticate. You'll find them going in front of the scholars saying, in my opinion, even though I haven't found a scholar to call the hadith weak, I believe the hadith is weak, and so on. Be warned about this jur'ah that our Shaykh Saalih al-Fowzaan mentioned, as it's manifested here in Multaqa Ahl al-Hadith. So be warned of it. It is Multaqa al-Muta'alimeen. It is a Multaqa, it is a gathering place for people who feign to have knowledge, not a place of Ahl al-Hadith al-Muhaddithin al-Ulama. La. Also, there are people who they gain online degrees, and they may feel themselves qualified to speak about narrations. And this goes for any science, really, not specific to the sciences of hadith. But the sciences of hadith specifically do need a lot of training, a lot of correction and personal guidance from a scholar of hadith before a person can become grounded and know his way around hidden defects in the chains and matters that are related to the science of the isnad. It is not something people can learn online or through books alone, and then they become experts and extremely highly qualified specialists in. Rather, these are, as the Shaykh has referred to them, muta'alimeen, people who feign a level of knowledge that is not something for them. And as the Shaykh said, and he mentions so often, you've heard this from him before, right? That al-ilmu yutalaqqa an al-ulama. Knowledge is to be taken directly from the scholars. It is to be taken with talaqqi, first of all, person-to-person contact. It's not something that a person can simply study from books and gain knowledge. For the very issue, the thing that the scholars of the past would begin with and focus heavily on with their students would be manners and how a person interacts with knowledge. And with this, people sit back, and he may be laying on his bed, chewing some kind of food, and he's studying the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, relaxing, kicking it back like this. Had he been in the presence of a scholar of hadith, he would never read the words of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and think he's studying hadith like this. And this goes for as well people who learn Quran. You find the people who learn Quran from recordings and from online programs and things like that. What's their approach? You don't find them with any knowledge or any reverence or any experience with a real scholar, how they would sit and how their posture would be and how their movements would be when they spoke of or discussed something related to the knowledge of their field. So this becomes entirely missing. And as well, those people who their knowledge is from online courses or places where you learn things and you don't get interaction and you don't get the scholar correcting your manners and looking into how it is that you're carrying the knowledge. We've seen a huge calamity of people who don't know how to carry knowledge at all. They may have mahfuz, they may have a body of hadith or ayat memorized, but they don't have a clue about how to carry that within themselves, nor how to deliver that. You find them harsh, you find them difficult to deal with, you find them with poor understanding, you find them poor-mannered across the board, and this is something the Salaf used to warn us against. They said whoever would take his knowledge from a book, then his mistakes would be many. And the mistakes here are not just technical mistakes in the academic issues, but in the manners and in the manhaj, the methodology of conveying that knowledge. Who does he work with? How does he work with them? How does he aid the truth? How does he make sure that he increases the places where the truth is taught? He increases them in numbers, and he doesn't increase the people of innovation in numbers by going there and lending his name to their organization. All of these things take insight that is gained from the scholars, not just a person thinking, I have the correct position in the issue and I have the evidences, so wherever I go, I will convey this knowledge that Allah has blessed me with. And even if the person ends up assisting the people of innovation in a certain place, double their numbers or triple their numbers, and they take his followers away and they lead them into deviation, and he thinks because I've spoken the truth, everything is fine. He doesn't look at masalih and mafasid. He doesn't look at the long-term benefits and the long-term harms of what he does. All he knows is, I learned this academic issue and I learned it correctly, so I'm going to teach it. He doesn't give concern or proper thought to many, many issues which affect the way the information spreads and how it is taken. It is not of the utmost importance that the information be correct without considering the manners and the situations surrounding the conveyance of that knowledge. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. So I warn you of this approach, that even when you're in the West and you are not traveling to the scholars, unable to travel to the scholars, then you studying under a student from the scholars is better for you than grabbing the book yourself and saying, I'm going to study directly from the books of the scholars. Why? Because it may be that some of those manners that have trickled down from the scholars through that student who's local in your area, that may be of benefit to you. That may be something that you learn from, as well as the theoretical knowledge. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. There are interactions between a scholar and his student. And you may have seen something like this for those of you who've been around me, between a student of the scholars and the people who learn from him. That the scholar, or in his absence, the student, gives advice directly to people, those who are regular attendees, those who have, shown that they are of a higher level of what can be expected from them in Islam. They deal with them with a bit of harshness or a bit of, expectations that are not expected from other people. And they blame them for what others may be excused for. And they deal with them directly and harshly in a way where others would be, in issues where others would be excused. Right? And this is from the manners of our scholars, that those who are more capable of more advice and more direct, even sometimes, very critical speech, then they're given that. Those who are weaker in the religion, or not so advanced and so on, then they're dealt with as the Bedouins were dealt with in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. excused for the majority of what they would do of bad manners and not accountable and not, not punished or anything like that. So then, based on the level of your commitment to your religion, if you are around a scholar, you will see that scholar will, advise you sharply for your best interests and help to improve your character in a way that is in a way that is motivating, in a way that is challenging for the one who can be challenged. For those who are not on that level, then the Shaykh will interact with him differently. And I've seen specifically with insight from our Shaykh Rabee ibn Haadee al-Madkhalee, for example, the one I've seen most closely in his interactions between the different levels of students. I've seen a student that is close, and that is committed, that is very, always at the gatherings and all of that. And I've seen the Shaykh deal with this class of the students, this level of the students, with very harsh interactions. Much higher is expected from them, and any little mistake will be focused on heavily. Whereas the one who comes occasionally to a Friday lesson doesn't really attend except, perhaps you call him the lowest rank of student, then he may dress inappropriately, he may behave inappropriately, he may enter inappropriately and leave inappropriately, his posture is inappropriate. It may be that everything he has done is a mistake. And the Shaykh would smile at his face and say, "May Allah bless you." And that's it. And of course, nothing of the type would ever be allowed from a more dedicated student. And we saw with our Shaykh, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala, what reminds us of the manners of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and how he dealt with the different classes of the people. So it's important for us to learn that from our scholars and as well embody that when we are in roles of teaching, either as teachers or as parents as well. And so